Mark and I'm 51 and I have spasmodic dysphonia. I was diagnosed with spasmodic dysphonia approximately 4.5 years ago, 2015. I have adductor spasmodic dysphonia, which apparently is the more common of the two different types of spasmodic dysphonia, but it's the more common of this very uncommon condition. For me, developing spasmodic dysphonia was really life-changing because my career centered around my voice. Since childhood, I've been a professional entertainer. I was a singer and a compere comedian. So my voice was not just my means of communication in everyday life, but it was also my tool for work. It was my career. I was very used to being able to manipulate my voice. I was used to being able to have to use my voice in a professional way when I was speaking, when I was singing. So I was used to being able to have to get used to it being at different levels, using different volumes, different projection, all those kinds of things. And I took it for granted because I'd been doing it since I was young. It was second nature to me. So I didn't perhaps take as much notice when it first started as other people may do because I just thought, oh, I've got a little bit of a problem with my voice. Unfortunately, with singers and people who use their voice professionally, maybe coaches or lawyers or people who teachers, we all know what it's like to have to use our voice when it's not particularly at its best. That's just part of the job. You can't avoid that. You have to just continue to use your voice, sometimes to our own detriment, but we do it. Now that I'm a little bit more aware of voice and voice problems, I probably would never have done some of the more risky things that I did with my voice back and before I was aware of having this condition. So my life before I had spasmodic dysphonia was extremely different because it was all centered around my career. My voice was not only my persona, but it was my income. I first self-discovered what I had, spasmodic dysphonia. Good old Dr. Google was my first source. I recognised that, because as I said, I was so used to using my voice all the time, I recognised that what was happening was something that hadn't ever happened before. This wasn't laryngitis, this wasn't a tired voice, this wasn't a sore throat, this wasn't any of the things that I'd previously experienced as vocal issues. It was like my voice was cutting out in certain places. Not all the time, would sometimes depend on the time of the day, sometimes it would depend on the circumstances that I was in, sometimes it would depend on how tired I was, but I was just starting to notice that my voice was cutting out, and it was different to how it had ever been before. And when I was doing shows, the way it actually came about was I was doing a show one day and one of the sound guys said to me, "There's a problem with the mic, it keeps cutting out." And I knew, in fact, that it wasn't the mic, that it was my voice. He said, "It's like the receiver mustn't be good or something. There's some problem with, It was kind of like when you speak to somebody on a mobile phone and the mobile's cutting in and out. That was what I sounded like. And other people interpreted that as being a problem with the microphone or a problem with the phone, but I knew that it was actually me. So I Googled, why is my voice breaking up? And found about this thing called spasmodic dysphonia, which for somebody who's a professional voice user was a great concern, was a huge concern when I thought that might be possibly what it was. So I contacted somebody who I know who is a very well-respected vocal coach, and I rang her and said, "Look, I think I may have this condition called spasmodic dysphonia." And she laughed at me and said, "No, you haven't." She said, "Look, I know you and I'm listening to you talk over the phone. I know you don't have spasmodic dysphonia, but if you're really concerned, then you should at least go and get it checked." So I ended up being sent to a really good ENT and then a really good voice pathologist, speech therapist. Finally, after almost 12 months, I was finally diagnosed. It took a very, very long time to be correctly diagnosed. And over that 12-month period, the spasmodic dysphonia gradually got worse and worse. In the beginning, when I was first tested, they thought that perhaps it was muscle tension dysphonia, which is a different thing. It is a form of dysphonia, but a different thing to spasmodic dysphonia. Yes, socially it did have an impact because things, again, that you take for granted, meeting a friend for a cup of coffee became almost impossible because you'd go into a coffee lounge and there's a whole heap of background noise that I had been totally oblivious to before this condition started. I didn't recognise or listen to background noise. Perhaps if I was in a professional environment I might notice, oh yeah, there's noise that we need to get rid of. But you just take for granted. You go to meet a mate in a coffee lounge or in a pub or in a restaurant and that you can talk. You can't. When you've got spasmodic dysphonia and it's bad, you can't talk over the top of it, over the top of the background noise. Or background music can be another one. It's like, can you turn that radio off or whatever, because it just is so... And so it becomes easier to not talk. It becomes easier to not communicate. So you do tend to shut down a little bit, and that causes all sorts of impacts, has lots of impacts on personal relationships and business and work relationships. In the workplace, it can be a very difficult situation because you tend to go, oh, I won't talk about, I should raise that issue, I should have that conversation, but my voice isn't good today, so maybe I'll leave it till tomorrow or next week, and next week becomes next month. And then people look at you and go, you're not fulfilling your role, or you're not the person you used to be. So it has so many different impacts upon relationships. It's a very broad picture, but for me personally, losing my career was really hard to cope with, because that combined with the issues that I had around my identity personally, it was really confronting. It was really confronting. And voice is one of those things. I think we as a society, we think about going blind. We think about maybe losing an arm or losing our hearing. But the voice is something that we don't often consider. And yet, it really is as important, if not more important, than sight and hearing. But it's something we just take for granted. One of the things that I've been most grateful for is that at the very, very beginning of my journey, when I discovered I had spasmodic dysphonia, as I explained earlier, I used Dr. Google. So the internet can be helpful sometimes, even though doctors quite hate it when you self-diagnose using Google, but it can indeed be helpful. And I went on to Facebook and found a group about spasmodic dysphonia. And reading other people's experiences was helpful because it made me realise that I wasn't alone, I wasn't isolated, that there were other people who did have this rare condition. I joined this group and I put up, is there anybody here from Australia? Thinking there won't be. And sure enough, within a few hours, I had a person contact me. That led to the opportunity for me to meet lots of people who had spasmodic dysphonia. When I say lots of people, not hundreds, but several people who had spasmodic dysphonia. And that was of great benefit to me because the support that I was given through just the camaraderie and the fact that there was somebody who had empathy, that understood, that got it, that knew what I was going through, that was of great comfort to me. The other thing that's happened as a result of my diagnosis and also due to the treatment and the fact that I've actually got a pretty good speaking voice, even though I have spasmodic dysphonia, most people would not be aware of it, is the fact that I've been able to help some other people who have had the condition. In the same way that people helped me when I first was diagnosed and were able to give me advice and tell me which doctors to go to, I've been able to help some other people who are at the end of their tether, who have been misdiagnosed, who've been told that it's a mental problem, who've been told that they should be, they've been prescribed antidepressants and all sorts of things that have nothing to do with the condition whatsoever. And they've been at the end of their tether, particularly people I've found who are in regional areas who don't have the access that perhaps we are lucky enough to have in the capital cities of Australia. Some of the people in regional areas you can't find in a GP, let alone an ENT specialist or somebody who has a good understanding of what spasmodic dysphonia is about. So the silver lining, if there has been any, has the fact that I've I've made some great friends and some great networking, and it's helped me be stronger within myself and more resilient, and also the fact that I've been able to, in turn, help other people. best piece of advice that I was given was by my neurologist very early on in the piece. And he said to me, I can guarantee you one thing, and that is that I can't guarantee you anything. And that was a very important piece of advice, because in the 5 years that I've been dealing with this condition, I've fluctuated between having a really good voice like I have at the moment to times where I have hardly any voice at all. And with the treatment, I get botox injections into my larynx, and one of the things that I really, even though I'd read about it beforehand, until you experience it, you're not quite sure how it's going to be. But one of the things that typically happens to a lot of patients when they have botox injections is that their voice actually tends to deteriorate for a time prior to getting better. So I have had 2 weeks of poor voice after post-injections, up to, I had one time where I was like 7 or 8 weeks, and I thought, is this ever going to come back? Is this voice ever going to come back? Then I've had periods where I've had only 3 or 4 months out of the injection, like a good voice for 3 or 4 months. I recently, hallelujah, went through a situation where I had almost 12 months out of a single injection, which is unusual, but I was very grateful for it, because the injections, whilst they're not nearly as scary as I thought they were going to be, and that was something I should talk about in a minute too, but the injections, whilst not being as invasive as I thought they might be, they are still an invasive procedure, so it's not something you want to be tripping off to the hospital every week to have. The less I needed to have the injections for me, the better. There are some people I've heard of who apparently have the injections once every 6 weeks, or regularly once every 2 or 3 months. And so that piece of advice that was given to me by the neurologist of, we can guarantee you one thing, and that is we can't guarantee you anything, is that it's different for every single person. Every single person has a different reaction. For some people, botox injections don't work at all. For some people, like me, luckily, they have a great response to the botox. And the amount of time that you get out of the treatment can vary as well. So that whole thing of we can't guarantee anything, I've learnt to there were times where I thought, I've beaten this, I've got it worked out. I know that if I have the injection 5 weeks before I need to use my voice, that it's not like having your hair cut and going, yeah, if I get it cut 2 weeks before that day, that wedding day, or that whatever important social occasion, I know my hair will look really spot on. It doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, I wish it did, but it doesn't. So you have to learn to appreciate that it's not going to, you can't predict it, you just have to go with it. For me, going to a speech pathologist, whilst the lady was really just so lovely and empathetic and understanding, the reality was that it wasn't helpful to me. Maybe for other people it would work, but for me it didn't. The best thing that I got out of the speech pathology or speech therapy was the interaction I had with the lady who was helping me, because she was somebody who really did understand what spasmodic dysphonia was. She knew what to listen for in my voice when I was talking. She knew how to identify the breaks. Things that I I can now identify in others when I hear them talk, and I go, there it is, there's this break on the vowel sound there. 9, one of my big triggers was hello. I just had a little bit of one there. Hello, 9. I would get, when it was at its worst, 9, hello. Anything where there's a vowel, that's apparently quite typical of adductor or AD, spasmodic dysphonia. The vowel sounds are the ones that tend to cut. So the speech pathology wasn't helpful really in what it was supposed to be doing, except to say that the empathy and caring of the voice pathologist was great, and it indeed did lead me to the right professionals to get the right diagnosis and the right help. And that's a big issue, is finding the right people to help you. One of the things that irritates me most is when people say, oh, I've had that. That's always good. I've had that. And the thing is, I've learnt too that most people are really well-intentioned. When they make a comment, it's not because they're trying to be hurtful or they're trying to be uncaring or trying to say the wrong thing. They're actually doing the opposite. They actually mean it in a good way. But the interpretation sometimes isn't great, and sometimes their delivery is not real great either. So one of them is, I've had that, and it's like, no, you haven't. And if you have, I probably would have met you earlier, because this is a rather rare... People just think they've had it, it's like a bad voice. The other one that really irritates me personally is when people say, "How's your throat?" There's nothing wrong with my throat. The inside of my throat is actually... My voice is stuffed, but my throat is fine. In fact, one of the ENT guys said to me he was doing a laryngoscopy. Is that even? He was doing a laryngoscopy, and he was looking down. He said, "Look, your throat is perfect. Your larynx is pink and moist. It's beautiful. There's absolutely nothing wrong with your throat. It's your brain that's the problem." And I'm like, yes, precisely. So when people say, "How's your throat?" It's like, my throat's fine. It's my brain's not. I think one of the really important things for family and friends to consider, and when they're having conversation with somebody who suffers from a voice condition, whether it be spasmodic dysphonia or some other form of dysphonia, is to firstly be cognizant and aware that they have a voice condition. There's no point in yelling to them from another room going, "Hey, do you know where the such and such is?" Because I can't yell back. I can't do that. So you need to come, if you want to ask me a question, come to me and ask the question and look at me, because if you can see my face and read my lips, that will actually assist if I have no power in my voice or no chance of projection. So that's the first thing, is for the listener to be aware of the fact that as much as I might want to, I can't converse in the way that you do. So it's just about being aware. But the other things that I've been able to do, just some little tricks that have helped me when I don't have a good voice. First of all, avoid noisy environments. You learn to plan your day and plan ahead, so as if you're meeting a friend, you know a coffee lounge or somewhere to go that's when you go to the quiet corner. You don't stress your voice. You don't try and push your voice. You have to learn to be quite diligent in the way that you use your voice. You want to try and savor the best of it for the right circumstances. I've also found that breathing is a very, very important thing for me. A lot of people with spasmodic dysphonia tend to shallow breathe. They breathe in their chest. So if I'm having voice breaks, I find it very helpful to inhale and really exhale and use diaphragm type techniques of breathing that, as a singer, you are aware of. A lot of people, they tend to breathe with their shoulder. It's like the shoulders aren't involved in the actual breathing process. So breathing is very important. And if you're breathing steadily and properly, it's easier to have a voice. Right, it's part of the process. So breathing has been a good trick for me. Another one has been humming just prior to wanting to speak. So if my voice is bad, I might begin a sentence as I just did then by doing a little humming just prior to commencing the speech. At the moment, my voice is really good, so it's probably not a great example, but the humming thing has been something that's helpful. In hindsight, looking back on it now, I wish I had realised at the beginning, it's not going to stay like this. It can get better. This isn't a sentence. We know it's not life-threatening, but it can really alter and change your life quite drastically. But the knowledge that there is treatment available, you don't have to put up with this. You can get help. And if the treatment doesn't actually get you back to 100% of voice, the other thing is that there's other people who understand that you can talk to, that can give you support and advice and encouragement, and even just an ear, somebody to talk to, somebody to understand the frustrations that you experience that are exclusive, really, to people who have voice conditions. People who don't have voice conditions don't understand. They don't get all of the different things that we all just take for granted. It's only when you have a voice condition or you speak to somebody who has a voice condition or has had a voice condition, they get it. We're a very small group of people, and we've got to stick together.